session. All right, without further ado, this is the roadmap of today. So I'm going to start with introducing the concept of polysemy and how it's related to dak in Cantonese, and then the issue, the key question, and then jumping to zoom out a little bit, the big picture as an area phenomenon, and then look close up into the polysemy of Cantonese dak sentences with 4 different readings, actually, with descriptive, potential, permission, and focus readings, and then to give an analysis of how these 4 readings are connected to each other on the one hand and differ in certain senses, and before offering a proposal, a formal analysis of these sentences and how the different readings are derived based on this unified formal framework, before drawing conclusions and showing you some of the implications that this study would bring out. There are some bonus materials, as you can see in the yellow box there. These are materials for you to ask, and I'm going to discuss them because I don't think I can finish all of them in the 45 minutes. So the roadmap is what I'm going to focus on, and the bonus materials, you can, feel free to ask questions about them, and I can go through them with you. All right, so what is polysemy? Polysemy is a lexical relation where a word, either spoken or written, has multiple senses and which are considered to be related. There is a neighboring concept with it, which is homonymy. They differ in just one sense, in the sense that homonymy also has multiple senses expressed by the same word, but the meanings are unrelated, as opposed to polysemy, where the different readings are related to each other. So it sounds a bit vague whether it is related or unrelated senses. So take a few examples. English examples first. So in 1 to 3, these are English examples of a word with multiple meanings. So in 1, you can see the word bark. So my neighbor's dog always barks at me. Versus in 1b, you have it as a noun. So the tree's bark is rusty brown. In 2, you have the word good in different senses. So Peter is a good student, as in an honest or diligent student. And Picasso was a good painter, as in a good, producing good quality painting, very talented painter. 3, you have bright. So Kitty is a bright girl. And in 3b, you have the lights in the room are very bright, so describing the lights. So which is which? Which is related, which is unrelated? So obviously you have in 1, a case of homonymy where the 2 barks are clearly different. So 1 is the sound made by the dog when they're shouting at you, so that's barking. And the other one is a noun describing the outer layer of the tree bark. And example 2 is a case of polysemy where it is basically good quality, high quality, and combined with different nouns, you have different senses. So as a student being good, it will be honest and diligent. As a painter, being good is talented, producing good quality painting. So it's basically the same meaning with slightly different context and so different meanings. So they're related meanings. Number 3 is a bit ambiguous because you can say that there is a morphological extension from the brightness of lights to the brightness of a person being smart. So the relation there is a bit vague, so it's still undetermined, I would say. What about Cantonese? We have something quite similar to the English example. So look at 3, look at 4 here. So 4, you have, so here, wulong is actually the oolong tea, all right, type of tea in Chinese. And in 4b, you have, so wulong here is basically made a callousness, all right? So little brother has made a callous mistake today by not bringing his sports shoes to the PE lesson, all right? So clearly these 2 are different and unrelated meanings, but the same phonological and written word, right? Wulong. So in 5, you see a different case. Here you have 我最怕作文 meaning writing. 千祈唔好信佢好中意作大 meaning to exaggerate, all right, to make something big out of something that is actually small, all right. 佢啲演技仲未得啊，太作狀啦。So 作狀 here means too pretentious, sorry. So basically making up a situation which is not true. So all the 3 meanings of job is basically connected to something to do with composition and creation. All right, so there is some kind of relation between the three meanings of job here in number 5. Example 6 is ambiguous again, as in example 3, just now we've seen with English. So here in 6a, you have the root meaning of 水, water. So 飲多啲水, right? And 6b, you have 呢間公司食水好深. 食水好深 here means to make a huge profit margin. So this is an idiom, right? So here meaning something like money, profit. So you might want to think that it is a morphological extension, a metaphorical extension, a conventionalized metaphorical extension of water being money or profit. But here you see in 6c again, that you have 整色整水, meaning put on such an act. Here is not really something to do with profit or money again. So here I would say 6 is like 3 in English, being undetermined in terms of lexical relation. So the case that we're going to focus on, the kind of relation we're going to focus on today is like 5, polysemy, where a word has multiple related meanings. So what we have seen in 1 to 6 here are cases of a word which is a content word, something like a noun or a verb with substantial meaning, having different senses, multiple related senses. But what if we're not talking about a content word? What if we were talking about a functional item, something like English the or a and the articles, for example, functional items without a very substantial content, but still have multiple meanings, multiple function or readings. In this case is even more important because they don't just have multiple meanings, but in that case, they would appear in different so-called constructions. And to say that these different meanings of a functional item is actually related to each other, we are in a way also saying that the different constructions in which this functional item appears in are related, all right? If you follow the logic there. So key question today is, the focus is on Hong Kong Cantonese dak in post-verbal position. Post-verbal meaning after the verb, pre-verbal meaning before the verb. So here we're focusing on dak appearing post-verbal position, although they are also found in pre-verbal position as the native speakers might be aware of, but we're not going to talk about those. It's just post-verbal position dak. The key question is, what is behind the similarities and differences between the 4 different readings of Cantonese dak sentences as exemplified in 7 to 9 here. I'm not going to go into detail of 7 to 9 right now, but suffice it to say that they are examples of the 4 different readings of descriptive, potential, permission, and focus. But we're going to come back to these examples later on, offering some quick answers to the question here. So right now, take a step back, zoom out. Is dak the only case in the world where there is such a functional item expressing these meanings? No. So there is a big picture here. It is a great area of phenomenon that has been found by Simpson 2001 and most famously by Nick Enfield in 2003 in his book about mainland Southeast Asia, which is basically this area composed of Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, and bits and pieces here and there in Southeast Asia. We call them mainland Southeast Asia, Myanmar as well, actually. So languages involved would be Thai, Lao, Hmong, Cambodian, Vietnamese, and we have, of course, in China, which is not part of Southeast Asia, but we can also find a lot of languages or varieties in China, either Sinitic languages or Chinese languages or non-Chinese languages. For example, Zhuang is not a Sinitic language. So Zhuang, Mandarin and Cantonese, so Hong Kong is here, would also have a word like this, which is basically the acquire word or the get verb, all right? So based on the very detailed typological survey in Enfield's book, we can basically, and other works related, we can actually summarize that there are 4 key functions of dak, or not dak, but acquire or the get verb. First of all, they can be lexical verbs, meaning to get and acquire, and they can be a modal, meaning can, similar to can in English. They can be complementation marker, introducing a complement. They can be aspect-like in pre-verbal position. So Hong Kong Cantonese dak is just one case in point for this whole family of acquired words, which are known to be famous to be polyfunctional. All right. So there are also, that has also been found in Northern European languages as well, to have such a get verb, meaning not just as a verb, but also functioning as a modal element. We're not going to go through Northern European languages, we're just going to focus on Cantonese today, and Hong Kong Cantonese particularly. All right, so polysemy in Hong Kong Cantonese. So dak, as I said, started off as a lexical verb, meaning to get and acquire, but that, I would argue, has basically been lost through time, through history. So as a verb, you might think that it can be used like intent. For example, 呢部電影得過獎, or can be 我哋得到第一名, or intent 是得物無所用，不如捐俾人啦. All right, so here basically it means to want a prize, to get number one, to get first. But these meanings are no longer really active because these two sentences in 10A and 10B are not very natural in colloquial Cantonese, Hong Kong Cantonese. So in this case, dak either would have to pair with the achievement marker 到, like 我哋得到第一名, or better still, actually the verbal meaning of to get and acquire is best expressed by another verb, which is 攞. For example, in 10A you have 呢部電影攞過獎, which is much more natural, or in 10B 我哋攞到第一名, which is again more natural. All right. The only case in terms of lexical use that dak can be legitimately used as a verb would be in fossilized expressions, idiomatic expressions. For example, 得閒, meaning free. So you get free time, 得閒. Or here, 得物無所用, which is to get something, but you don't have any use of it. That's why I say, why not donate it to others, as in 10C. Therefore, the focus of the study is on the functional meanings of dak. And there are 4 meanings in such a case. Before going into those 4 meanings, I'm going to kind of show you some of the terminology just to clarify on them. So for all daks, I'm going to gloss them as ACQ, short for acquire, which is the terminology used in the literature to refer to all the get atomon related functional items in the world. And then P1 and P2 stands for the predicate that precedes the ACQ, that is dak in Cantonese, and P2, which follows the ACQ, all right? And predicate means a bit more than the verb, is basically the verb phrase, all right? So the first functional reading of Hong Kong Cantonese dak is descriptive reading. In this case, if it's giving a descriptive reading, something like an 11, so 我行得好快, right? So it's I walked very fast, or I walk very fast. The fast describing the pace of the walking, all right? So dak is followed by a P2, a predicate 2, all right? Here it is usually involving an AP complement, AP meaning adjectival phrase or adverb phrase. So adjectival or adverb complement that describes the manner in which the event described by P1. P1 here in 11A would be行, which is to walk, is how that is conducted, right? So in 11A you have 我行得好快, and in 11B you have 媽媽洗得啲衫好乾淨, which is mom washes the clothes very clean. So the P2 here is very clean, or the clothes very clean, and P1 is wash, right? So the clean is describing the state of the washing or the manner of the washing. Just be satisfied with that understanding for now. I'm going to give you a bit more new perspective later on, but this is like a general description of it. But if you compare 11 to 12, you see something different. So 12 is also introducing some kind of a manner. For example, 小明跑得好攰. But that doesn't sound very right unless you use 到. So 小明跑到好攰, that is okay. Or 技安打到大紅喊 is okay, but 技安打得大紅喊 is not very legitimate, is not well formed in Cantonese at least. So the generalization is that the P2, that is the predicate that actually follows dak in Cantonese, has to be an individual level predicate, not a stage level predicate. What does that mean? So an individual level predicate is a predicate, according to Carlson 1977, a predicate that describes a permanent or unchanging property of the individual. Stage level predicates, on the other hand, are transient properties, describing transient, changing or to be changed properties of a certain event or person, individual, right? So the division here, the generalization here is that when the P2 is an individual level predicate, we use the ACQ dak in Cantonese. But when there are stage level predicates like in 12, 好攰 or harm, then we use the achievement or success marker 到 打到大紅喊 跑到攰 instead of 跑得攰 打得大紅喊. All right, so this is the first reading, the descriptive reading. And then there are two different modality readings. But what is modality in the first place? Modality is a semantic category operating at the sentence level that express the speaker's either degree of commitment to the proposition or the possibility of realizing what is described in the proposition. Something that we're familiar with would be adverbs like likely, necessarily, or verbs like to know. So I know this is true, or I believe this is true, has very different meanings, right? Or auxiliary verbs in English like must, should, can, may, will, and so on. So these all encode modality. And in the theories, there are the tradition from Palmer 1986 to define modality in at least two ways, two big ways: epistemic modality and root modality. Epistemic modality to do with speakers' commitment to the proposition, whereas root modality has to do with possibility or necessity of realizing the proposition. And then root modality further divided into dynamic, deontic, and so on. And there is another framework, however, developed by von Orera and Plongeon, 1998, that is called modality map approach. In that approach, the primary division is between possibility and necessity, and then further division into four different subtypes based on the source of possibility or necessity. Either the source comes from internal of the participant, for example, my ability to speak Japanese or speak Cantonese, that is participant internal, or allowed or enabled by the circumstance, which is participant external. For example, you can take bus 66 to go to Central, for example. It can be deontic, coming from someone's permission or someone's obligation to do something. All right, for example, you can open the window to mean that you are allowed to open the window. Epistemic, something to do with speakers' knowledge, speakers' commitment to the proposition. So different sources of possibility and necessity. That is the model that is introduced in this paper, and that is also the model that we're going to follow in this study. So going back to the functions of post-verbal dak in Cantonese, a second reading is a potential reading. So here it is quite typologically robust to find the acquire words to express a modal meaning similar to can. And in this case, in Cantonese, we can see in 13, here we have 我睇得明首詩, meaning I read and I can understand it, this poem. Right? So I'm able to read and understand the poem. And in B, 師傅劈得開嚿磚, so the master can actually cleave open the brick, basically to cleave it. All right. So here, dak seems to be introducing the ability of the subject to reach a certain state in P2 in the event of P1. So in the event of read, it is saying that the speaker, that is, or the participant, can reach the state of understanding. Right? So read to the state of understand, cleave to the extent of open. Right? So the P2 expresses the state to which the event in P1 is going to be achieved, but there is only the ability, but not the realization of it. It's just the ability to do it, but it hasn't been done yet. Right. So here is needed to clarify that the ability meaning here is not about mental know-how. It's not about 我識得講 or 識講, which is to mentally know something. It's a physical ability to move something, to open something, to read something. So this is a physical ability, not mental know-how. A second modality reading, which is Cantonese exclusive, is permission reading, which is different from what we've seen in potential. So this is the person's ability to do something, physical ability to do something. Here it is the permission granted to the subject. He's allowed to perform a certain action in P1 to P2. The P2 could either be an entity or could be a state. For example, 佢揸得呢架車, meaning he or she is allowed to drive this car, this particular car, right? Or 佢行得入嚟, he or she can walk in here, right? So this is a permission reading. For example, it's not something to do with your ability to drive in 14A, but you have, of course, the ability to drive and you are allowed to drive this particular car. So it's about the allowance, the permission granted. So it's permission reading. And then the focus reading, that can also express a kind of restrictive meaning, very similar to only. This is proposed by Tang, 2002. Restrictive meaning can be triggered in the absence of the adverb of 淨係. So 淨係 is the only, the adverb for only. For example, here, 佢淨係睇得3本書. If you omit 淨係 here, which is only, you have 佢睇得3本書 to mean that he has only read 3 books, but not more than 3 books. Or 聖誕老人送得2份禮物俾我炸. Here, 炸 is also a discourse particle meaning only, or in any sense not more than that, or not something else, right? So only that. But without 炸 you can also have 聖誕老人送得2份禮物俾我 to mean Santa only gave me or gave only 2 gifts to me. So this is a restrictive meaning which is also conveyed by duck. So the question is, what is the connection between these 4 readings? How are they different? Of course, we can see some kind of distinction, but how exactly are they systematically different from each other? And what is the connection between them to allow one word, one functional item to express all the 4 meanings? And how do native speakers know which is which reading is which, in which context? So this is the question to be answered. So look at modality first. There are 3 reasons for treating duck as a modal element, as is quite usual in the literature to treat duck as something like can in English. So the first reason is that they do ubiquitously produce a modal interpretation, as we have seen in 13 and 14 in the previous 2 slides about potential and permission readings. So this is about their semantics, which they really do produce modal interpretations. Second one is that they kind of survive a test of free choice items licensing, which is introduced by Cheng-Bisman 2003. So here we can see that bin go something, bin something, though is a kind of expression that we call free choice item. And these items are only licensed in non-theoretical context, namely modal or subjunctive or questions and so on. So in 16A, you have邊個人都入咗嚟. This is not well formed to mean anybody came in, right? Because 咗 is not a modal. It doesn't express any non-theoretical sense, but you can see that in 16B, you have 邊個人都可以入嚟. So 可以 is the canonical modal auxiliary in Cantonese. 可以 is basically like can. So, but duck also functions exactly the same way as 可以 here in 16C. So you can see that 邊個人都入得嚟, meaning exactly the same as 16B. 邊個人都可以入嚟, which means that they both take matrix scope, so sentential scope of modality. And indeed, the 2 can co-occur, right? So in 17A, B, and C, you can see that it can stand alone. 佢搬得張 sofa 入嚟, that's all right. You can omit duck and just use 可以, 佢可以搬張 sofa 入嚟. Or you can have the 2 together. So 佢可以搬得張 sofa 入嚟 to mean exactly the same meaning. He or she is allowed to carry the sofa in here, all right? So this is what I suggest to be a modal concord. So modal concord, taking from the concept of Zylstra 2007, is the kind of bonding between the agreement between a modal auxiliary, something like 可以 in Cantonese, and another modal element. Here is duck. They establish a kind of bonding, a concord between them when they co-occur in the same sentence, but they have to match in terms of modal type. For example, here it is the same permission reading. It can also be a potential reading, but it's not obligatory, as you can see in 17a-b, where they can just stand alone, right, without co-occurring. So these three reasons are some key reasons for the literature to suggest that dak is actually a modal element. We have to pause and think. So if we're saying that dak in Cantonese is a modal element, then are we claiming also that it is a modal element across the board? It is always modal. The answer is no. So consider this. In 18, so you have 隻馬騮跳得好高. Right? There are two readings of this sentence, either that the monkey jumps or jumped very high, or that the monkey can or is able to jump very high. So there are two readings. Can you do it the same thing with 可以? Not really. So you have 隻馬騮可以跳好高, which native speakers have judged to be quite odd. So what about when they co-occur? So 隻馬騮可以跳得好高. Then again, the reading is fine. But here, the reading of the monkey jumps or jumped very high is ruled out. There is only the potential reading of the monkey being able to jump very high. Another example, 方太煮得隻雞好好食. So here again, two readings in this case with just dak appearing in the sentence. So Mrs. Fong has cooked the chicken very tasty, or the potential reading of Mrs. Fong can or is able to cook the chicken very tasty. Again, if you just use 可以, the sentence is marginal, but if you put dak back into the sentence is good again, but only with a potential reading. What does it show? If you compare 19, 18, and 17 just now, so 17 is this, where they co-occur and this pattern, basically meaning is the same throughout. If you compare these three, they can see that there is something more than just modality in 18 and 19, where dak is not just expressing modality, but there is a descriptive reading, as we've seen earlier on in the slides, a descriptive reading which 可以 alone cannot express. That's why 18b and 19b are odd, whereas 17b with just a potential reading, 可以 can stand alone. So consider these examples. So in 20, you have 睇下隻馬騮跳得好高啊. Right? So the monkey is jumping very high. So what is this doing? So if you add this exclamative of 睇下, which is look, then the difference is clear. If you remove 好, then the sentence is bad. You can't have 睇下隻馬騮跳得高啊. 睇下隻馬騮跳得高啊 is actually odd if you remove the 好, right? So indeed, if you try to remove the degree marker 好 here, as in 21 and 22, so these are basically taken from 18 and 19, but just removing the whole degree marker, very. So if you have 隻馬騮跳得高 or 方太煮得隻雞好食, then you do not have the descriptive reading of the monkey jumps or jumped high, or Mrs. Fong has cooked the chicken very tasty, but only the potential reading of their ability to jump high, their ability to cook it very tasty, right? So the key difference, therefore, right here, is that in a descriptive reading, you have the event already actualized, already realized or happened, whereas in the potential reading, the event has not happened yet. It is just a pure statement of the potential or the ability of the participant or the subject to do a certain action, to realize a certain state. Right? So if you go back to the key question with this example 7 to 9, so here is example 7, 佢唱得好好聽 and 佢跑得快. The difference here is in the descriptive reading in 7a, 佢唱得好好聽, the singing is realized, it is actualized. But in the potential reading in 7b, the reading is not actualized. So the running has not happened yet. It's just the potential of Koi to run fast, right? So, but there is a very intriguing connection between descriptive and potential reading in that you can think of the potential reading as an entailment from the descriptive reading, meaning that if you can describe a monkey to jump high, to have already jumped very high, you can already understand that it must have the ability to jump very high, right? So this is an entailment, meaning that it necessitates the ability to do so if you have already achieved it. So another thing, so focus, these are two readings which are kind of Cantonese exclusive, which is permission and focus. So what exactly is focus? First of all, it is synonymous to the adverb 正係, which is only, and it can appear with 咋, which is again a discourse marker to express only. So basically a focus reading is a restrictive reading similar to only. But what exactly does it do to the sentence? This is what I call exhaustive identification. But what is it, exhaustive identification? Exhaustive identification is a key component, a key defining feature of identificational focus, which is proposed by KISS 1998. So the terminology of identificational focus is a similar concept to contrastive focus or narrow focus, which stands in opposition to information focus or presentational focus or wide focus, right? So this is the terminology I'm going to adopt: identificational focus versus information focus. What exactly are these? Identificational focus represents exhaustive identification in the sense that if you imagine a set of items, for example, 10 items that the proposition can potentially hold, and I'm saying that only 2 of them, and exactly these 2, would fit to exactly this predicate phrase. So I'm not claiming the rest of the 8 items in the set of 10, I'm only claiming 2, and exactly 2 out of them, for example. So this is exhaustive identification. It has to be exactly those 2 things or 1 thing or 3 things that you're claiming, apart, and the rest will be excluded. So they can be marked by prosodic stress, all right? For example, I've only bought 1 book, so this is a stress. Or you can mark it by a lexical item like I've only bought 1 book, or in Cantonese, 我淨係, all right? Or discourse markers like 咋, right? Or structural markers like cleft construction, which is basically, as Kiss said, is the defining structure for contrastive focus or identificational focus in this case. Or copular construction, as those of you who have been to Emily's talk last time in August, she has mentioned about copular construction in Chinese as well. So information focus stands in opposition to identificational focus. Information focus is a broader idea, which basically just marks new non-presupposed information. So just new information is present in the sentence, and information focus is present in all sentences. You have it in all sentences. And in Chinese, it's been suggested that information focus is not marked by any particular structural or lexical markers, but by structural position. By the fact that something appears in sentence final position, then it is already having an information focus. So whatever happens in the sentence final position is new information. Whatever happens in the front is old information or presupposed information, technically. So applying this to duck sentences, there is a test. So there's a coordination test proposed by Stapucci in 1981, which is that to find out if a sentence actually has exhaustive identification or identificational focus, if you have 2 sentences, the first sentence has a coordinate structure. So for example, a hat and a coat. If there is identificational focus, then the second sentence, which has removed one of the components in the coordinate structure, would not be the logical consequence of the first sentence. Look at the English examples in 24 and 25. So in 24, you have, it was a hat and a coat that Mary bought for herself. But if you have in 24b, it was a hat that Mary bought for herself, that would not be the logical consequence of the first sentence of it was a hat and a coat that Mary bought for herself, because it has to be exactly a hat and a coat. You cannot leave out the coat. But the opposite case is shown in 25. Without the cleft construction, you have Mary bought a hat and a coat for herself, which basically is true. as well in B when you say Mary bought a hat for herself. This is all right. So there is a clear contrast between 24 and 25 because it is only in 24 that we have identificational focus, but we only have information focus in 25. We find exactly that in duck. So in 26, we have 媽媽買得2個番茄同一條魚. So if you then say, report to other people that 媽媽買得一條魚, then that would not be a valid account of what exactly happened because Mama actually bought 2 tomatoes and a fish instead of just a fish. So you cannot say that mom only bought a fish. That would not be a good description. But 27 is okay. So if you have 媽媽買咗2個番茄同一條魚, then you can actually say in 27B that 媽媽買咗一條魚. That is, mom bought a fish. All right, that is okay. So clearly, then we can see that duck also expressed identificational focus. Then the question is, what is the connection between focus and permission? Are they that different? Then I would say that they're not that different most of the time. They're mostly ambiguous. Why would I say that? Because if you consider the sentences in 28, in 28A, you have 佢攞得張梳化同2個 cushion 落去. Here, this is ambiguous in the sense of permission, meaning that he or she is allowed to carry the sofa and 2 cushions down, or as a focus reading, he or she only carried the sofa and 2 cushions down. This sentence, if you report it as 佢攞得張梳化落去, it would not be a logical consequence of 28A because you would then have left out the 2 cushions which have already been brought down or is allowed to be brought down. All right. So here you can see that in 28A and B, that's given the ambiguity of expressing both permission and focus readings, you can still have the exhaustive identification, meaning that they still express identificational focus. The only difference between them, as you can see in the translation, is that in focus, again, as you can see in descriptive reading, it is actualized. So the sofa and the 2 cushions have already been brought down, only carried down, all right? And in permission reading, they are not brought down yet. They're not carried down yet, all right? So, so what about the other structures? What about other readings? Do they have focus or do they not? I'm saying that they have focus, but they do not have identificational focus. They have information focus. So the difference, I've explained the difference between the 2 concepts, but look at the sentences here and you'd see. So in Simpson 2001, he says that in Thai and in Vietnamese, whatever happens, whatever appears after the ACQ carries focus. Therefore, in a non-focus sentence, the ACQ would appear in sentence final position. So he has the WH question test to test for the focus scope. So contrast 30 with 31. So here, if you have the question as 佢做乜嘢啊, then the valid answer cannot be 佢揸車揸得好小心. It can only be 佢好小心咁揸車, because the question is asking about the whole event. So you can't just focus on 好小心. But if you look at this in 31, 佢揸車揸成點啊? Then you can say legitimately that 佢揸車揸得好小心 instead of 佢好小心咁揸車. Because here, the question has already presupposed, it is already known that he's driving. So there's no point in saying that he's driving. You can, the point here, the question is asking about how does he drive? How is her driving? So the focus should be on the manner. So here is careful, right? So again, this is another contrast. So this is also discussed in Thai 2018, that the difference between a pre-verbal manner adverbial as in 32B, so and 32A, so 他很高兴地玩着. This is describing a dynamic event, whereas with the, it is describing the state of affairs. So what can we conclude from all these? So I suggest, as a quick answer to the question of what is the similarity and differences between the different readings of duck sentences, that there are actually 3 parameters in featural terms: actualization, focus, and modality. So with these 3 features, we can then distinguish the different readings. And also, provides a general mechanism to derive the different readings with a kind of unified approach to the understanding of duck. So here you have focus, plus and minus focus. Plus focus means there is identificational focus. Minus focus means there is only information focus to what is after duck. And here, modality feature is realized as possibility in Cantonese and then valuated as deontic for permission, meaning something to do with demand or request, and internal as participant internal ability for potential. All right, so that's the parameters. Going back to the sentences from the start, then we can classify them as these. So these two sentences are only different in the sense of actualization. In descriptive, it is actualized, in potential, it is not actualized. And in A and B, the difference is that in permission, there is focus, there is identificational focus, and it is deontic, whereas there is no focus, and it is an internal participant, internal possibility in potential reading. In 9A and B, which is permission and focus, the difference is in actualization again. So very quickly, this is my formal analysis. So try to put it into the framework of minimalism, adopting a copy theory of movement and the VP hypothesis and the VP hypothesis. This is the full-fledged configuration for Cantonese ACQ constructions. So basically, I'm claiming that duck hosts his own projection, which is the ACQP here, which is the acquire phrase. And duck actually functions as a complementizer, something similar to the English that, which introduces a small clause complement, which is here, of the size of an aspect phrase. So it is monoclausal, and there is inner aspect encoding actualization. So this is the basic understanding of duck sentences and the basic framework for it. The three parameters are realized in these ways. So the first one is actualization, which is realized in aspect head, and the focus projection to encode identificational focus as opposed to information focus, which is only indicated by structural position. Modality, when there is an overt hoyi present as well in the sentence, then there is a concord relation between them. Otherwise, the modal projection is absent. So to derive the different meanings, you have descriptive reading as such, where you have the adjectival phrase here, and then the movement of the verb to the little v and actualization here. And with potential reading, you have the possibility feature, right, which is otherwise absent and not actualized, as I've mentioned before. And then with a permission reading, you have the focus phrase projected to host the nominal here and the possibility feature, but still no mod p projected because there's no overt canonical modal. Focus projections again appeared in focus reading with actualization feature on aspect. So to conclude, I have argued for a basic configuration, a same basic configuration for all the acquire sentences, the ACQ sentences for Hong Kong Cantonese duck, with a duck hosting its own projection in the ACQP, and it is acting as a complementizer similar to that in English, introducing a small clause complement with the size of an aspect phrase. And there are three parameters: the actualization parameter, focus, and modality, which is realized as possibility in Hong Kong Cantonese. Some of the key implications of this parametric framework is, first of all, that it considers the four different readings under a unified treatment. A wholesome picture is derived for the nature of ACQ, not as a model, not as a focus, but as a complementizer that can introduce different sorts of complements in the small clause. And it is a testable framework, which is highly generalizable in terms of cross-linguistic investigation, because as we've mentioned in the start, there is a big picture of error phenomenon. So we have to also account for that. So this is the readings I've considered. Thank you very much. Welcome all questions and comments. Thank you. So any questions? you may use your mic. You can read out your questions, or you can type it in the chat box and I can respond to you.
Hi, hello.
Yes, hello.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay. My question is that for teaching a foreigner to learn Cantonese, okay, what are this differentiation or whatever? How should we teach, a foreigner to learn Cantonese, to know these four modalities or these four different cases of use of the term dak, some guidelines or whatever?
Yeah, so I think it would be, that's a very good question. Thank you for that. So I think it would be very common for learners to actually come across with this question of what is this duck doing? So I think the first way to do it is to introduce that it has different readings, right? So it has all the four readings, and to say that duck in, if you tell them that duck here is a modal, duck here is a focus, then they may be a bit confused. The thing that you can tell them is that it can derive these readings, but it's not inherent in itself that it has a modal reading. It happens with the constituents around it. So for example, you can see that in a focused reading, it always involves a nominal to follow it, all right? And particularly a quantified modal, for example, 三本書, all right? Or with a descriptive reading is usually coming with the adjectival phrase to follow. So something like this would help the learners, I think.
Okay. Another question. Can I ask one more question? Okay.
For
just a local child who learns to speak Cantonese in Hong Kong anyway. Okay. And sometimes they mix up 得 and 可以. Okay. They would say that, for example, usually we would say 你唔可以咁做. Okay. But they will say 你唔得咁做.
Okay. That is interesting.
Right? Yeah.
That is interesting, yes. And I would say that this is not just in child language.
Yeah.
It's not just in child language, but I also noticed that in, for example, in old films in Cantonese, then you have something like 你唔做得咁 or 你唔得咁樣㗎. That is also quite often the case in old films in Cantonese. So they are actually undergoing a certain developmental process. So don't have to worry about it. It's just an interesting phenomenon to us linguists. Maybe as a parent, you may be worried, but it's just a developmental process that they have to go through. And that may be kind of an early stage of it, because that can also function as an adverbial, which I have not mentioned, as like okay, to mean okay. So for example, 我煮炒飯好得㗎. That is like the fried rice that I cook is very okay, is very good. All right, so duck can be meaning okay. So maybe they have overgeneralized that okay use of duck in this case. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Very interesting presentation. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Any other comments and questions? Anything I should clarify or you'd like me to? Yes. Yes, please. Hello? Hello, Ms. Ho, is it?
Hi, Cherry. I want to first thank you for putting together this presentation. It was so enriching, and also a lot of things that I learned from that. And
thank you.
One thing very interesting that you mentioned about that, it used to be a verb for gaining, but then it, somehow this usage has been lost through maybe how the language evolved, through how people use it now. So as a researcher, especially for this term, do you see that having more usage, or some of the usage of this term will be like lessen or increase in some area? Could you share a little bit with us?
Sure,
thank you.
Sure, thank you. That's a very good question and good observation there. So yes, the lexical meaning of duck has been lost already through what I say grammaticalization. So this is a process of grammaticalization that is not only happening in Cantonese and not just happening with duck. So you're right in saying that, are we losing some meaning or are we gaining some meaning? We are, I think, doing both. In this case, we are losing some of the lexical meaning, more contentful meaning of duck, and gaining more functional meanings of duck. All right, so something similar to the process of grammaticalization in duck is something we see in English, for example, will. All right, will originally means like to desire something. I will it to blah blah blah. So here is already grammaticalized to mean like a possibility as a modal auxiliary. So something similar, a lot of grammaticalization processes have been going on in languages around the world, and including duck. Here they are losing a lot of lexical meaning and gaining some grammatical functions. But we also see other cases of lexicalization, so like forming words as well. So some other cases would be that they are functioning more like a contentful word as well. So some people have also proposed that there is this kind of cyclic process going on, turning a lexical word to a grammatical item and back to a lexical word, something like this. So good point there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sherry.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Hello.
Yes, hello,
go
John.
ahead and,
hello.
Hi.
Nice seeing you virtually, though.
It doesn't seem to me, just intuitively, that the focus duck is polysemous with the other three. So I can see the relationship between the other three. And I do understand that you're saying that permission also gives a, you're saying it's plus focus because it identifies as identification focus. But I don't know, just intuitively it seems separate. So that seems more like a case of hominy rather than polysemy. But I don't know how that would affect your analysis syntactically, or you know, or if it would. I mean, it's you have a nice grid and a nice picture, nice story. So I don't know if that affected or not.
Focus, yeah, thank you for pointing that out. So I've started off with a polysemy story with duck, right? So saying that they are related meanings. And so, yeah, it is my obligation to actually judge that they are related rather than unrelated, like homonymy relation. So this reading of focus is not coming from me, it's actually coming from Tang Si-Wing's paper 2002, that there is this focus function of duck. And indeed, this focus function allows duck to also appear in pre-verbal position in the subject position. For example, 得我先識講廣東話. Yeah, so only me can speak Cantonese. All right, so this is in the subject position. So this he regarded as is different from the post-verbal focus duck. So I'm not looking at the pre-verbal cases, that's why. So just as the post-verbal uses of duck, then you can see that there is a very frequent ambiguity produced by focus and permission readings, which kind of ties the two very closely together. That's why I say that they're both plus focus, meaning plus identificational focus. And because permission is again tied to potential and so on and so forth, so I kind of picture them as a polysemous relation. But of course, you're right, because the focus reading has an extra layer of restriction to the reading, which is not present in the other readings. But so it's more like so there's the only reading which is not kind of prominent in other readings, like potential or descriptive. But you can also say that the potential reading is also not prominent in the permission reading or in the focus reading. So in that case, the whole story about the polysemy kind of like cracks down, right? So I would say because of the close tie between permission and focus in the post-verbal use of duck, then I would say that the polysemy story still holds, I hope.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, no, I understood your argument and that you're sort of reiterating that. It just intuitively, it still feels a bit different. But I don't know what to say beyond that. So, yeah. But very good, very interesting. Thank you for the talk. Yeah.
Any other questions? If not, then I think by the time we're only like 2 minutes ahead to the original schedule of 4 o'clock. So shall we call it a day, or you'd like to ask a few more questions? You can, of course, email me if you have further inquiries or you have further insights to share. So let's call it a day, and I hope you find this not just informative or you don't have any information overload. I hope you find it interesting, and I have successfully convinced you that there is a polysymous relation between the 4 readings, and they form a nice parametric framework there. I hope I've convinced you that. So thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And John, do you have
just one last question. Do you have something written up on this that
yes, I've submitted a paper.
To?
Yeah, I submitted a paper. Yeah, so it is not published yet. I've just submitted it to a journal. So if you'd like to have a look at the manuscript, I can send it to you privately.
Oh yeah, I would appreciate that.
Yeah, I can email it to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
We'll stay in touch there. Yeah, thank you. Thank you everyone for your interest. So have a nice evening. I'll see you in other occasions. Bye bye.
Hi, thank you.
Bye bye.